Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the State of the Art the State of the Arc podcast. My name is Mike.
My name's Kason.
So here's the thing, fellas. What is supposed to happen is we choose a topic and then we study that topic throughout the week, and then we come to the podcast with interesting thoughts, well researched and well thought through perspectives and opinions and takes on interesting story telling like methods, and you know what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is that I didn't do that.
We didn't do that. Exactly. That's not how this podcast worked. That's how the other ones work.
I am so freaking like burned out and exhausted, and I'm just trying to manage too many things. I'm trying to do too much. So I need to think about how to scale back so that the things we do them really well.
Yeah.
So we've already picked out next week's topic. Next week, we're going to be talking about how to properly adapt a video game into a film. And I already have ideas for that. It's just that I haven't done that research, so I don't feel like I could say anything interesting about it right now.
Right.
So we took to Discord.
That'll be next week.
We had you guys suggest a couple things for us to just spitball and talk nonsense about for the next hour. Next week's podcast will be good, so if you can hang until then and just bear with us.
Yeah, forgive us. Forgive us this time.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
We're not going to do any stories of the week. I didn't see anything in the news that I thought was interesting, so we're skipping that. And we're going to move straight into two things that you guys wanted us to talk about this week. One, the question. This is not my question. I didn't phrase it this way. This is how it was given to me.
Straight out of Discord.
The question is, why do silent protagonists suck? The second one we're going to talk a little bit about is narrative versus world building. What's better for RPGs? So those are kind of the two things we're going to hit on. We did have one question that I forgot to address a couple weeks ago because we had planned on doing it, but then the podcast was really long on it. So I was like, hey, we'll come back to your question later. And it was due to the length of that particular podcast. But this came from THP on YouTube. And it's about how to become more social, how to get over fear and anxiety with socializing, talking to people, things like that. But before we do any of that, there's actually one thing I need to address as well. A couple weeks ago, I did a podcast about, to summarize, mostly brain science, the way that our brains, individual brains, perceive things differently, even though it's the same stimulus, based on cultural and social upbringing and all kinds of different factors, right? There was one thing that I said in there that I had misinterpreted the study regarding the tribes in Africa that see colors differently and stuff like that. So I wanted to read what Kitten Nugget on Twitter, who is definitely more knowledgeable in this field than me, said in response to that, to sort of correct myself a little bit. He says, hello, Mike. Let me start my message by saying that I'm a big fan of the Resonant Arc YouTube channel. You guys probably do my favorite YouTube content right now. And the State of the Arc podcast is the only podcast I still make sure to find time to listen to. Thank you for doing that. I appreciate that. Glad that you like it. Says, I'm writing this message because I'm a Portuguese student doing my master's thesis on cognitive science, more specifically on cultural differences in perception. And while listening to the last podcast, I thought I could have some things to say that you might find interesting regarding the role of language in perception. Namely, what you described on the podcast has been called the, I don't know how to pronounce this correctly, but Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. The notion that language affects perception in such a way that it can change the way we see color. But there are two currents of this hypothesis. You can think about it in two ways. In one hand, you can think about it like language is shaping your mental world in such a way that we don't have a word for something, or when we don't have a word for something, it's basically like that something does not exist. in that this is similar to I think Lannon's talked about this in Japanese, like the word for blue, isn't it?
Blue and
Or
green are the same.
the
Yeah.
same word, right? So they
They
don't have.
yeah, they technically have a word for green. It would be like Midori, but everything they say owl, the sky, and like they call when the traffic light turns green, they call that turning blue. And
Mm,
that's just how their culture worked for a long
right.
time.
So due to, I think what he's saying here is due to that,
Mm,
that's gonna the fact that that word doesn't exist is kind of where he's going with this, right?
right.
You can talk about it like language is shaping your mental world in such a way that we don't have a word. When we don't have a word for something, it's basically like that something doesn't exist. In that vein, language would actually affect perception, such as the Nambians and Westerners who would actually see colors differently. And that would be pretty exciting. But unfortunately, this isn't what research has been showing. So that's what I was saying, is that they see the color red differently than I see the color red due to their language. That's
Mm.
kind of that's what I thought the hypothesis of the study was. Apparently, it doesn't seem to be the case. Um, says the role of language in perception might be more related to attention to details. Let me give you an example. The Eskimos have different names for the different tones of white. What this does is that it directs the Eskimos' attention to different whites, such that small changes in this color might be noticed by them. But us Westerners might see two slightly different whites, but those whites are always the color white to us, because we are not paying attention to the way in which they differ, but the
Mm.
way in which they are similar. So imagine you present two very similar whites to a Westerner. He might say that it's the same color, not because he doesn't see the difference, but because it isn't important to him. While an Eskimo might say they are a different color, but the Eskimo and the Westerner aren't actually seeing something different. The information on the routine is the same, or on the retina,
On
maybe.
the
I think
retina, yeah,
retina
the
on the retina,
wavelength
the
of
way
the
it's coming
color.
through the retina
Yeah.
is the same. The way they process it is what's different. I hope this was helpful. Thank you for all the effort you put into the channel.
Well, great. Dude, we got some pretty legit people that listen to our podcast.
Makes me feel good, man.
Yeah, me too. That's awesome. Well,
Yeah, but
cool.
thank
I'm
you.
glad to have that clarified a little. I still think there's, room for difference there, even though the colors they're seeing are the same. What is red to a Westerner and what is red to a tribe in Africa, the Nambian or whatever they said,
Mm,
what we call red might be slightly different, but when presented with the same color, we would both see it the same way. So, all right,
yeah,
I see
most
that.
the most brains are interpreting that color
Yeah.
the same
So
way.
their typical standard red might be a more of a maroon to us, but
Yeah, but it's not necessarily because the brains are seeing a different color,
yeah,
or that we're
that
not
makes sense.
noticing the difference as much as it just we don't pay attention to the differences due to our language.
There you go. Makes sense.
And that example of Japanese with blue and green having the same word
Mm,
is a great example, I think. So,
yeah.
anyways, wanted to clear that up, make sure that the correct information and interpretation of that study was shared. Okay.
Cool.
I'm shutting my brain off for the rest of this. Let's get to some why do protagonists
So,
suck.
Mike, why do silent protagonists suck?
Well, I'll tell you why. So, I think that silent protagonists suck because they are misused. Anytime that you'll something like that, a tool in the game developer creator's toolkit, which is silent protagonists, right?
Right.
It's really hard for me to ever say the tool sucks. It's when you try to use the tool
True,
for the
true.
wrong purpose
Yeah.
that it sucks, right? So if I have if the job that needs to be done is that I need to drill a screw into the wall, yeah, I can use a hammer for that, but it's not gonna be good to hammer the screw into the wall. Like it's gonna it's gonna jank up the wall. It's not gonna, the screws are not, the what do you call it, the thread is not gonna like go through the right way, and it's not gonna hold in the wall if I just bang it in there, right? Whereas if you twist it in with the screwdriver or with a power drill or something like that, that tool is efficient for that job. So silent protagonists are very effective tools for the purpose of role playing. And when I talk about role playing, I'm talking about like like traditional D&D style role playing.
Mhm.
Um, and so if you have a game like the Elder Scrolls, a series like that, um, it's not really a silent protagonist in the sense that the guy doesn't talk. It's just that he's not voiced. You
Yeah, and
choose.
everything he says is your choice,
Yeah, there's
essentially.
tons and tons of dialogue options where I can choose what to say, and that we have dialogue trees and branches that lead to different outcomes, and
Yeah.
you'll have multiple endings for either the game or just for that quest or whatever it is, right? So, silent protagonists as a tool for that purpose, for the purpose of immersive role playing, are great. The problem is that I think where this sentiment is coming from is silent protagonists within the Japanese style RPG, which is influenced by traditional role playing, but tries to have like a stronger narrative rather than like building a world and letting you go out in there and like explore that world and just like
Mhm.
see what's there and sort of interact with it, which is more like traditional D&D. Because like,
Right.
so when you're playing D&D, you're a DM, right?
Right.
If you try too hard to like tell a narrative, you're gonna have a really hard time because
It's going to
there's
get
never
messed up. Yeah.
there's never a group of guys that are just gonna do exactly what you want them to do. And
Right.
one guy's gonna be kind of the clown of the group. It always happens. Who wants to be contrarian and do the thing you don't expect and make it funny. And that's part of the fun of it is the group dynamic. And it's more about that group telling their own story in the world that you built. That's what good DMs do. If you try too hard to structure a linear narrative for them to follow, they're gonna not like it. They're gonna feel restricted. That's not the place to
Mhm.
like try and like give a novel type of linear storytelling. Rather, you set up a world, you let them go create their own story in it. And I think that silent protagonists for that purpose in video games are great. It's when you're trying to tell this really important narrative with a specific theme and specific setups and payoffs and a more of a linear traditional story, and then your character doesn't talk, that it feels out of place and weird, and then people are like, well, this character doesn't have any depth to them,
Right.
and
Yeah.
they and that's when it starts
Yeah.
to feel wrong. um
You know
those are
what's
my
funny?
thoughts on that, but
I would say the silent protagonist thing, it works so much better. Like you mentioned things like D&D, and I guess there were more older games that were more like similar to how D&D actually kind of was, as opposed to like games today, games like Elder Scrolls, where it's like you've got something that uses D&D elements, but clearly is, it's not exactly the way that D&D kind of used to work. And I think there
yeah,
is a bit of a time like split. Like people who grew up playing things like D&D or the early Nintendo games, early Sega, early even into the PlayStation era, there were most of the protagonists were silent. They didn't say anything. Like you played Mario or Duck Hunt or I don't know, there whatever games you played, even the first like Legend of Zelda, nobody talked back then. Every now and then you get stories where your character actually talked and you hit A and read the dialogue. But it's almost like a product of its time that people who grew up throughout the 80s and 90s would prefer a silent protagonist more than people who grew up past the year 2000, where I think there were less silent protagonists. And even games like Legend of Zelda, as it progressed from what it was to what it is, it makes less and less sense for each subsequent game to have a silent protagonist featured. But that's how it started. That's probably how it will continue for a long time. But I think there's a time split there, with people who are older being okay with it and people who are younger being like, why the heck? What is the deal with silent protagonists? That's stupid, right?
yeah. Anvil of Doom says, I wouldn't count a character where you choose dialogue options for them as a silent character. I would only count characters such as Gordon Freeman or Chrono, characters who literally don't communicate almost. Now, here's
Huh.
the thing. With Gordon Freeman, I think I agree with you. But I would say almost no other time is it meant for us to believe that the character doesn't speak? Even Link from The Legend of Zelda will have moments where the king character goes, "What happened here?" And then Link does this animation where he's got his arms
Yeah.
out and he's kind of like doing this.
Like he's talking. Exactly.
Obviously, he freaking talks. Like
Yeah.
when he goes to meet Zelda in Ocarina of Time, she goes like,
Yeah.
"I had this dream. Like, who are you? And what's your name?" "Oh, Link." Obviously,
Exactly.
he said his name to her. So
Yeah.
Link does talk in
See,
those
and that's
stories.
one of the reasons why going forward it gets more and more difficult to keep Link as a silent protagonist.
Yeah.
Especially when you watch those cutscenes in Breath of the Wild with Mifa or Zelda, or it's like why is Link not talking? It's always people talking at him, and he's just kind of listening, or he's trying to do something, but he's not responding. But all these people are talking to him as if he does usually respond. Just in this case, he's not, but it makes it really awkward. And I love the silent protagonist Link. I would not approve of, I would almost say 99.9% that any voice actor they give to Link, I would not like.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean, both sides, it's true, because on the other side, you've got, yeah, it's awkward. He's not talking. What the heck? But if he talked, I'd be like, dude, this guy's voice sucks. This is not what Link should sound like.
Well,
There's a huge problem there for a lot of video game creators.
Here's the reason that I think why it works for characters like Link and Chrono.
Mm.
They're again, it's never black and white. Like my example of, if it's a world building type of thing and it's not like a linear narrative, then a silent protagonist works better because you're role playing. So they tried to take away as much characterization from that protagonist as possible, so you can sort of exude your own personality through it, because you're supposed to be role playing.
Yeah, it's like reading a book instead of, well, actually not so much because it's a narrative, but in terms of you're filling everything with your own mind.
Yeah,
you're not. It's not all being presented to you. You have to fill in the gaps yourself a little bit.
Right. So there's definitely a difference between the Elder Scrolls, which is trying to simulate more closely the D&D type role-playing experience, and then on the other spectrum, something that's very linear narrative focused, like a Final Fantasy game, let's say Final Fantasy VII, right? Which allows you to rename the characters because that was just a trend, because that was like the way they tried to get you to connect and role play.
Yeah.
But the character has characterization. They have a story already set in stone. They have a personality. I am not him. He has dialogue. And so like there is a certain like disconnect there. It's not really role playing anymore. Like it's called a Japanese role playing game because of the style that it's taken on, but that's not really role playing at all. You're just watching a story.
Yeah.
The only role playing aspect is customizing the character's equipment and stats and how you customize their abilities. That part of it's there, but the actual story role playing is no longer there. So somewhere in the middle, you find Chrono Trigger and like The Legend of Zelda, right? Now, The Legend of Zelda is not an RPG from a gameplay perspective per se, but it still kind of carries that story role playing element in that it subtly guides you into allowing Link to interact with people, because we're not trying to say he's a mute or something like that. He can't literally not speak. And obviously, he would need to speak to interact with the people in the world. But they take away as much as possible showing him doing that so that you can kind of like personify yourself through the character. And to me, that's always been effective in the Zelda series. Like I agree with you in saying that I don't think Link should have a voice. Yeah. And I think that there's a very certain style to the way dialogue happens in The Legend of Zelda that would be lost. There's a character to how characters in the world of Hyrule interact with Link that is like a staple of how it feels to go through those games that would be lost if he had a voice and he like responded back to people. So I would never want to see that happen personally.
Yeah, me too.
And it's a similar idea with Chrono. There are still like dialogue options sometimes. You can choose to do this or choose to say this. It's very, very basic. Suikoden is very much the same way. You'll have like options every once in a while for things that how you can respond back to someone, but it's very minimal. And I think the purpose of that is to try to retain the element of I'm stepping in and role playing, but they want to have their cake and eat it too, to a certain extent, where they can still tell their focused narrative while also letting you feel like you're role playing. Kind of a best of both worlds scenario. And that is effective or not effective depending on the example. I think Chrono Trigger and The Legend of Zelda is effective. I think Suikoden's pretty effective. I'm sure that if I sat long enough and thought about it, I could think of some places where I don't think it's that effective. Chrono Cross. Chrono Cross, I felt like the character should have spoke. I didn't feel like the silent protagonist in Cross worked for that particular story they were telling. I felt like he needed to speak. So, there's a spectrum here to work in, and it's going to be, up to the individual to decide what they like and what they don't like. But I'm hesitant to call the tool bad or say that the tool sucks, because if used in the right way, I think it's the only choice. Sometimes it's the only way to go. It doesn't make any sense to do it otherwise. If you want your person, your player, to feel like they are role playing, giving the character a voice doesn't make any sense, because now it's taken away from them. They aren't the character. It's not them themselves, right? So obviously in that scenario, having the character speak would be the tool that sucks. So, anyways.
True. Why do voice acted protagonists suck, Mike?
Yeah, exactly. Right. What are people saying here? Jojo Face, thank you for subscribing.
Yeah, what's up, Parker?
Appreciate it, man.
Oh, I have a thought though. I have a thought real quick.
Go for it.
There are a couple. I've seen a lot of old Japanese samurai films, right? Mm-hmm. And in those movies, the main character, the lead samurai who you're supposed to identify with, he is not somebody who flaunts his abilities. He's not somebody who shows off. He is very quiet. He's slow to be angry, and he's slow to speak and all that kind of stuff. But when somebody attacks him, he is able to, all of a sudden his abilities come out, right? And there's like an idea within Japan of people who are arrogant are looked down upon even more. Like, you're supposed to hide that. You're supposed to be humble. Like, humility is a huge thing in Japan. And even the best people in the world, even some of like their athletes or some of the sumo wrestlers, you listen to them talk and they are incredibly humble, and it's built into their culture. It's kind of how they have to be. And the Japanese will respect even more somebody who does not talk very much and then is able to go out and perform and, beat somebody up or do whatever it is. I remember there was a movie called Zatoichi, that old Japanese samurai film, but the main character is Zatoichi. He is blind, can't see anything, and he does not say almost a word ever. But all of a sudden, when people try and attack him, it's like it comes out. His sword comes out, and he's able to do stuff that just was like, oh my gosh, it makes you respect him so much more because he didn't flaunt his abilities. But it's not just bragging or being arrogant. It's just not talking much. Like, people who don't talk much in Japanese culture, but can back up, but can hold their own, essentially, are people that a lot of Japanese people really like that. Like, they really gravitate towards that. And I think a lot of video games, especially with silent protagonists, will, it's kind of cool when characters are like that. Mm-hmm. So I think there might be some cultural thing too with Japanese influence on the video game industry, with why silent protagonists are seen in maybe by a lot of people, especially old times, are seen in a more positive light.
Anvil of Doom, and there was somebody else who said something. I think it was before that. Oh, Hydrated Cloth says it worked for Commander Shepard, and Anvil of Doom says, well, a game like Dragon Age Inquisition has both dialogue options and a voice for your character. I believe you can choose a handful of voices. So I will agree in saying
Huh.
that in Mass Effect it worked as in the game works.
Sure.
The
Yeah.
the fact that Shepard is voiced and you make dialogue options
At the same
works.
time, though, I didn't feel like I was Shepard,
Yes,
like, at
that
all.
was my point. I
Yeah, not
never
even close.
felt like I was Shepard. I
No,
always
he's
saw him
yeah.
as a separate person from
Yep.
me. So if the goal of the developer was for me to feel like I'm implanted in the world, this is me going around doing this, then it wasn't effective. But I don't think that was necessarily the goal. Whereas when I play Skyrim, I feel like I'm the dude. Like I feel like I am the Dragonborn. I'm the person.
Yeah.
He doesn't feel like a separate person for me. Part of that is the first perspective, even though you
Yes, that's a
customize your
huge part.
character and stuff like that in Mass Effect as well. But when I'm seeing it, like first person perspective has like just like an innate ability to make me feel like I'm there, I'm the
Yeah.
person. But that's not to say that you can't also have that kind of connection, like I said, maybe through Link or something that's in a third person. Like there's no black and white in this. There's no like have it
Yeah,
one
some
way or
things
the
work
other.
in different situations.
There's so many ways you can do it. But all I'm saying is that in something like Dragon Age or Mass Effect, I didn't feel like I was that person. In
Mm.
Skyrim and Oblivion and Morrowind, I felt like I was the person, right? And I think that's the difference. Um, I don't know. I think we've.
I
What's
think that was
up,
good. There's not much
everybody
more to say about that.
who's entered into to the chat here recently? Welcome. We're
What's up,
moving now
everybody? We
into
can't respond to everyone, but hey, and we're
what's up.
reading all the chats. So
We're moving now into. It's actually a pretty good segue.
yeah, actually, you're very
Narrative.
similar. I realize.
Moving into narrative versus world building. What's better for RPGs?
So
We
why does
talk.
narratives suck?
why does why does narrative suck? It should be more world building. That's
Exactly.
apparently well. We read that interview several weeks back. It was an interview with Tetsuya Takahashi, who's the
Yeah.
creator of the Xeno series, so
Mm.
Xenogears, Xenosaga, Xenoblade. And it was I can't remember. There was a job listing for Monolith where they were hiring people specifically for like map building or something like that.
Uh-huh.
And he was talking about how map building is like the true foundation cornerstone of RPGs. And the suggestion was that building the world is what you should be focusing on, not so much the story and other things like that. And I think that the philosophy there is that we're trying to stick a character, the player, into the world and let them kind of go out, maybe even to some degree, kind of like I was saying, tell their own story, through their unique choices and exploration through that world and how they find things. And that trying to structure this rigid linear narrative isn't as good for role-playing games, in his opinion.
Mm.
I neither like agree or disagree with that. I think that's just one way to do it, and I think that it's very effective. Like there are a lot of people I've talked to. Well, I think this happens with anything that becomes mainstream or widely popular. So when Skyrim completely like exploded, and it was
Yeah.
just like a freaking world phenomenon, and everyone was playing. I think I just said that wrong. Phenomenon with an N, not an M.
Phenomenon.
Anyways, everyone was playing it. The freaking music was being memed everywhere.
Yeah.
Fusroda, like it just became huge, right? And
The
whenever
arrow in
that
the knee.
happens, yeah, arrow in the knee.
Yeah.
Whenever that happens, you have just a certain kind of person who's like automatically against that. If it's popular, then they're more critical of it, more nitpicky of it. Like my tastes are more refined than what all you sheep are out there wanting to play, right? So having a channel where I talked primarily about more niche JRPGs, I think there was a more common sentiment in my community of like, oh, Skyrim's overrated kind of thing. So I was having discussions with a certain person. I don't remember who it was. It was many years ago. This is before I think we even migrated to Warrior Lasky Plays. This was back like in Eisen Wilshire days. So, anyways, we're talking, and what I noticed is that like he was judging Skyrim based on what he looks for in his JRPGs, which is strong, focused narrative with really good characterization. The characters are well developed. They have relationships with each other,
Right.
and a combat system that is complex and that requires strategy and all of these sorts of things. Right? These are all the things he's saying Skyrim doesn't have, and it's like, well, you're not wrong about any of that. But I'll tell you what Skyrim, like what I did when I played Skyrim, mostly was explore. It was all about like finding that next waypoint and what's going to be there. Am I going to fall into a rabbit hole, so to speak, of like a new kind of adventure that I find at this waypoint? Is there something, there's always something else waiting kind of on the horizon, and you go and you discover it. Like I remember I'd set goals for myself. It's like, okay, I can see, because you're exploring and you get like the sort of like vague, not opaque, but transparency on like these waypoints that are close by. So it's like, ooh, there's something over there, right? So you can kind of like start heading that direction. And I tell myself, okay, I can see 3 of them. I'm going to go see what those 3 things are, and then I'm going to stop playing. And then I'd go and find it, and then it'd be like, oh, but there's like a whole quest sort of like at this place. I really want to do this quest now. And then I start like, like exploring, and you end up playing like 6 hours longer than you intended
way more.
because you get lost in the finding out what there is out there.
Yeah.
And to me, that's entirely what the fascination with Skyrim was. Once you've done that, now I try to go back to Skyrim and replay it because I kind of unlocked every waypoint. I did like every quest in the game. I figured everything out. When there was no longer any mystery behind like the world, and there was nothing left for me to discover in it, I can't go back and play the game anymore, really. Like I've replayed the game more than once, but it was like, I'm going to try it with the command codes and cheating through and just like messing around and seeing what there is. But I've never like legit played the game again without cheat codes and without like messing around in the world and just like testing its limits since my first playthrough, because that was entirely what it was about discovery and exploration. And so when I explained that to the guy, he was like, oh, like I didn't think about it that way. Like it's like, yeah, combat sucks in Skyrim. Everyone knows this. That's not why I'm playing it. That's not why it's interesting. If they improved the combat, that would be great. And that would make the game better overall, sure. But like I still had as much of a draw to come back, right? I'd shut it off and I'd have to go to school or I'd have to go do something else, and I'd be thinking about getting back home and playing again. I had that kind of like addiction to the gameplay loop of the game, but it was completely driven by its exploration. So in that sense, the world building was everything that made the game valuable to me. And the story, the narrative, was a total like distraction almost from it. Like it wasn't as important to me as just the world itself and the setting of that place and the history and the lore and reading the books and just like the discovery in every aspect was what I loved about it.
I kind of felt that way about Skyrim as well, but also with Breath of the Wild. And it actually kind of makes the game harder to play again. Like you mentioned, playing it a second time, after you've explored everything, the game has a lot less to offer because you know where everything is. Yeah.
I felt that way about Breath of the Wild as well. Like, I think I tried to pick it up again. There was part of me that was like, Breath of the Wild, let's just open this up again. See what's up.
I started doing the hard mode. It was really cool.
I just... like I already knew everything was on the map, and I found myself going like, I don't really care to play this again.
You just go straight to the Divine Beast, straight here, straight to the swords, straight, and it's like, you're not exploring anymore. It's not as fun.
So, I guess that brings up to my mind now, like what's the difference then in these games that I do replay over and over again? Why will I replay Final Fantasy VII annually for the rest of my life? But I won't do that for something like Skyrim. I mean, obviously, I've seen those scenes over and over again. Yeah. There's nothing necessarily to discover in it. It's just that story is so dang fascinating to me. Like, and the character is so beloved, and so like there is a certain, I don't know, there's a certain fascination that comes from a really interesting setting and exploring that setting, exploring that world. But for me, it's a one-time thing. Once you've done that, and if that's what it's got to offer, that's its main thing, then I can't really go back to it again. But if the story was great, and especially if it creates any sort of like powerful emotion in you, I think you have memories tied to that now, and like the
Yeah.
nostalgia begins for that thing, right? So when you revisit it, it's like you remember where you were, you remember how you felt, you remember the message and how that impacted you at the time, and you sort of like remind yourself of the inspiration you got from it, and that is something that I feel you can always use reminders of. It keeps you holding on to the truths that you learned from that, or from like I always talk about Chrono Trigger affecting my career choices. Right,
Oh
like
yeah.
I was at a place where I didn't really know what I was going to do. I was saving money for college, but I didn't really know what I wanted to pursue in life. And when I played that game, I knew I wanted to tell stories that made people feel inspired the way that I was. So when I replay Chrono Trigger, that feeling like emboldens that choice that I made and goes like, yeah, like I'm still doing this. Like this is what I want. So maybe that's, we've gotten totally off topic, I feel, but like I think that to me is why narrative driven games are things, are games that I can return to many, many times. But that doesn't like lessen how immersed and involved and engrossed I was in a strong setting. It's just, for me, I can't tend to like return if that's the only reason to return, is for the exploration part of it. But both can be super effective
Yeah,
in
what
hooking
people
you.
are giving examples of both having happy mediums in certain ways. Like The Witcher 3, obviously, has come up. That one's more narrative, I'd say, but the world building is still fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
But then somebody brought up Fable, and I was like, that's actually a pretty good example. In
Yeah.
terms of having like a good medium, also with the silent protagonist thing.
Yep.
He's not totally silent, but he's like pretty silent, I
He
guess.
he farts and stuff, right?
Yeah. you have that wheel of emotions you can show, and
He
anyways,
does. He
there are
just like
certain
chicken
games that
sounds.
can hit the medium.
um.
But
So
for the most part, I would say don't even. I don't know. You got to focus on what one or the other needs to be your focus. If you focus on neither, you might miss both, or if you focus on both, you might miss neither. Anyways,
yeah,
that's basically
that's kind of
you might
the
hit neither. There you go.
that's kind of the argument that I make for hybrid style action RPGs, where you're
Yeah,
trying to have like command based elements, but also
yeah,
like action elements at the same time.
and it's like,
I've
dude, pick one.
not yet actually. That's not true. Until this week, I felt like I had never played something that accomplished that, at least the way that I wanted to. I played zero point 0.2 Birth by Sleep, a fragmentary
Fragmentary.
passage.
Yeah, that has pretty fun gameplay actually.
Dude, that's as close as I think Square Enix has ever gotten to a command system and an action system working in conjunction, where I felt like I was making choices on the command menu
Yeah, there was
and
some strategy
moving
to
and
it.
dodging and doing stuff.
Yeah.
However, you still can't control a full party of characters in that game.
No, it's still
So
just one character. Yeah.
they haven't nailed that part of it. But
Mhm.
the idea of I have a little window over here with commands, attack, magic, items, and I can up and down through that, make selections while also managing my character moving in real time and dodging and blocking and attacking and using this kind of magic and then doing this kind of thing.
Yeah.
I actually legit loved the gameplay in zero point 0.2.
I gotta say, Kingdom Hearts 3 is gonna be really good. They have
It
slowly
is.
polished up many of the points of dislike throughout
Yeah.
the past games, and I think 3 is just gonna be crazy.
Yeah, I feel like that game is as close to the best of both worlds hybrid that I've yet played. And if Kingdom Hearts 3 plays like fragmentary passage,
I
then
heard it will.
that's the kind of thing where I could just skip cutscenes and play the game and still really enjoy it.
Yeah.
Very rarely can I do that because I really like to get engrossed in the story. But if the game plays that way, then I will be happy to play the game. I'll have fun playing the game. And anyways, but I make that argument about trying to have a hybrid between the two things. You can't control more than one person at a time in an action game. It's not possible.
Right. Yeah.
I can't run this guy this way and simultaneously run this guy that way and simultaneously run another guy that way and simultaneously be going through each of their commands in real time and giving them all at once. Your brain can't process that. It's not possible. So you have to pause the battle so that you can switch to this guy and give him a command. So you have to either sacrifice the real-time action aspect to give yourself the control of the party, or you have to sacrifice control of the party so that everything can move in real time and you feel like the action is high. You pick one or the other. You can't have the best. You can't have both.
And Final Fantasy 12 with the Gambit system did some really cool things in relation to that. Yeah. There is a planning element where you're not directly controlling these guys, but you are ordering. They are essentially doing what you most of the time would have told them to do in that situation anyways. I kind of would like to see something like that brought back in a more of an action type setting.
I made a video on this, but it was in reaction, I guess, to a conversation I had with Heon, and this is, I think, really the best way to do it. Is rather than trying to pull off the impossible, which is give the player direct control over all the party members, make it an action-based system that's super cool and has combos and all kinds of like reactionary. It tests your like motor skills, reaction-based skill to reading boss patterns and dodging and blocking. But at the same time, incorporates strategy. I need to use this guy and his skills for this, and I need to use this guy and his skills for this. You can't do it. So have some kind of slider, right? To where if it's at this end, the action stops and it's more like a turn-based game. It's now this person's turn in the initiative and I choose for them what to do. And then I move to this character and then in the initiative I choose for them what to do. If the slider's all the way on the other side, then time never stops and you just control one person and you run through and you just do what you do and you maybe use gambits to like tell other people what they need to do. But anywhere in between, you could get this like bullet hell style like slow-mo, right? And you could customize how fast or how slow that is. So that the battle can still move, but it's like I customize it so that it moves just a little bit more in slow motion, giving just that little bit extra time to tell the other character, switch to the character and tell them what to do and then switch back. Or I can make it go really slow, but it still feels like the battle's moving. It's just that, say you and me and someone else are on the battlefield together. The time that it takes my brain to make a decision on my next action is instantaneous. Yeah. Right? So, like, the thought of it is we go into the slow motion, but it's just like this person is making the decision for themselves on what to do next really quickly. But the abstract presentation of that is we've gone into bullet hell slow-mo, which represents that moment or period of time in which he made the decision, I'm going to do this. And then it goes back into fast motion again. And you're able to now to
use the slow-mo pretty well. It's just the changing partners that I haven't seen done yet.
Yeah. So I would love to see something like that where the player can completely customize their experience that way. And so that, you're not trying to please everyone in the sense that let's create a system that's going to work for everyone, but rather let the player choose. I just want it to be freaking turn-based, man. I just want initiative and I just want as much time as I want to make my decision, make it totally strategic. Or another person's like, fetch that. I just want to run and gun and slash and fight. And either person can choose to play the game how they want. Anyways, now back to what we're talking about. Just narrative and world building.
World building and narrative.
I think that I have no idea why that got brought up. Trying to have your cake and eat it too, I think, was the sentiment.
Yeah, exactly. Trying to do both.
Trying to do the best of both will usually lead you to not pleasing anybody. So you kind of have to, most of the time you have to choose,
Yeah.
I want this to be leaning this way, and this is the crowd that I'm making it for. This is my target audience. This is the type of player we want, and we're going to please them. Game's not for these people over here. Usually that's the best way to go, rather than trying to please everybody. It's too hard to do that.
Some people here are bringing up the Tales games, talking about how they have refined options to control the party and does it well. And of course, the Tale games, actually, I'm remembering now, Tales of Symphonia and Tales of Fantasia did a pretty good job of giving you an action system within an RPG boundaries, kind of.
I don't have enough experience with Tales games. Like, I've played them,
Yeah, we've
but
played
I've never
the older
gotten
ones, not the newer ones.
I've never gotten so hooked by them that I felt like compelled, like I've got to finish this.
Yeah.
All I know is that I did not like Berseria's combat.
Oh,
At all. It was mostly like face button combo style. Press triangle, square, circle, X in like the right combination, and you'll do this move. And you can customize which buttoned combinations would do which move. So you can say, I want this move to be triangle, circle, triangle, and then you would like put it in there. I didn't think that it did the best job either of being an interesting command-based thing. It was more like combo-based. And it just felt like a button masher. I didn't like it. I have not played Vesperia. I know that they just released, I think it's a re-release of Vesperia that's come out recently that people have been playing, and I think that's what they're talking about.
Yeah, where they're talking about Yuri.
Yeah, I don't know. I've never really like loved Tales combat because I think I played Gilia with the patrons, and it was like it's okay, and that allowed you to sort of switch characters. I do remember that you could like switch to the other character and stuff, but again, it still isn't like exactly perfect for what I'm talking about. You don't feel like you have control over all the dudes at all the time. You have to pass control to the computer at some point. Yeah. It's like I'm here attacking, boom, 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 and the computer has to handle what the other people are doing until I switch to them. When I switch to them, the character I just was now becomes controlled by the computer. Some people don't want that to ever happen. I do not want the computer dictating what the character does. Gambits are the best answer I've yet seen for that, where at least the computer is telling them to do what I told the computer to tell them to do.
Yeah, exactly. If anything, if you're going to lose control like that, at least make it so like you guys got to huddle before the fight or something and be like, hey, you do this, you do this, and at least give you some control before the fight.
It's interesting you bring that up because the NFL was his inspiration for Gambits. So he was watching football and he was like, what if I made a system where you draw up a plan before you go into battle, like a huddle, like you just said, and everyone knows their job and then they execute their job. And so that was his entire inspiration behind Gambits.
Sweet.
But anyways, it's just not possible to have the same level of control over the party as a traditional turn-based in a real-time action battle system. You don't get it. Like, you will lose some level of control. But the key is, how much is someone willing to give up? How much control they're willing to give up in exchange for fast-paced action combat.
Yeah.
And if there's a slider there, then you can dictate exactly how much control you want to give up to tailor it to your experience. And I would love to see someone try that. Anyways,
well,
let's move on to the last thing. This is community stories. This one came from THP. In my Kingdom Hearts streams, a question came up about, hey, I'm struggling with being more social, with being able to talk to people, with shyness and feeling scared to socialize, social anxiety. And, I thought it was just going to be kind of a quick answer to that, but there was a lot of people who kind of jumped in on that, and the conversation continued for quite a long time. And then this was asked in the comments of the archive when I uploaded it to YouTube. So it was something that seemed to be a popular topic, and so he wanted me to bring it up on the podcast and expand on it if possible. And so I thought we'd do that before closing. So this is from THP. He says, "Hey Mike, I found you talking about being social and your experience very interesting. I'd love to hear on a podcast both your personal life growing up and learning how you became more social. I think it'll make for a neat topic and would be really nice to hear." Okay. So I am a extremist introvert by nature, like hardcore introvert. I was very, very shy growing up. I had a really hard time meeting new people, talking to people, and really just being around more than a small group of people ever. My brother made all my friends for me. He is very extroverted, very outgoing. And so I don't want to say I relied on him because it wasn't like an expectation like, hey, go make my friends for me. But I wouldn't have had any friends, mostly, had he not gone out to meet people first. And then he's like, hey, there's these kids down the street, like, come over with me and like meet these people. And it's like, I don't know, like, I don't really want to. I'm staying here, play video games. He's like, hey man, like, come on, like, we're gonna do this or that, and like, they're cool, and like, this guy's like this, and then he would like tell me all about them. And so I and high school was a freaking nightmare. Like, I just had the hardest time with, like, because I think that I wasn't popular, obviously, because I didn't put myself out there, but nobody thought I was weird. It was just like I was invisible. I never felt like an outcast.
Oh, yeah.
Because I never gave anyone a chance to outcast me.
That's a good way of putting it. Also, something you guys probably don't know about Mike, especially back in high school, Mike was extremely athletic. And so,
I played sports.
Yeah, Mike was really good at sports, really good at basketball, played on the team and all that kind of stuff. And that may have been also part of the reason why nobody really cared to mess with you, I guess.
Yeah, so like I knew all the guys who were going to parties, were popular, were the jocks at school because I was on the team with them. But my relationship with them began and ended at practice or at the game. Exactly. In the locker room, I didn't associate. I would leave practice or I would go home, and there was no contact outside of practice.
Yeah.
And there was one time where I think we were having a water break or something, and there was someone was like, "Hey man, like we were just chatting about something. I can't remember what it was." And he was like, "Yo, you're pretty cool. Like you should come hang out with us." And I was like, I just didn't go because I was freaking scared out of my mind to like interact with girls and like so I had a really, really big problem with being antisocial, with being very afraid, any kind of public speaking. I remember there was one time where it was an English class and the entire thing was about it was about public speaking. It was about learning to get up in front of a group and like instruct or teach. And so I decided to teach juggling as my assignment for that. And I got up in front of the class, and it was one of the most vivid experiences where I literally forgot my entire, I had it written on the page, but it was fuzzy. I couldn't like focus. I was shaking, like I couldn't talk. And I just turned to my teacher. I was like, I'm like really nervous. I've completely blanked. I don't know what's going on. And she kind of tried to help me. And I finally like could focus on the paper. And then I went through the presentation and I got through it. But I was just paralyzed with fear when it came to like socializing. If I was around like you guys, I remember there was a party you guys had at your house one time. And there was a bunch of people there. Who was that girl that I liked? I'm so bad with names.
What year was this?
2000 or 2001 probably.
Ooh.
Maybe 2002. But I think it was my freshman year of high school, which would have been 2002.
I think
1.
Should I say the name on the stream?
I don't think she's gonna watch because I don't remember her name.
Was it Rebecca?
Yes!
Yeah.
She was there.
Yeah, I remember that actually. I remember
Do you remember this party?
I do remember this party.
Okay, it was at your house.
Yeah, it was at my place, and we watched a movie, Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, I think.
That's the one. Yeah. Anyways.
Not a great movie, but yeah.
Sometimes I could get through it if it was in a familiar environment like your house, because I was over at your house all the frickin' time. It was more my house than anything else. It was like a second house to me, right? So like I could be comfortable and be there for a while, but I don't remember staying that long. I think that I left after like an hour or something. But I had anyways, the whole point of setting this up is to say that I really struggled with this. So there were people on the chat who were saying they had a really hard time with this too. How do you overcome this? Because you need to learn how to socialize. You need to learn how to talk to people, to function in this world, to network, to improve your relationships, to advance your career, to find success in life. You have to work with people. As much as I try not to, even to this day, as much as I try to lone wolf a lot of stuff that I do and work alone and do it myself, it's just not optimal. In most environments, you've got to rely on a team in order to like get things done, rely on the strengths of different people and work together. So I served a mission for the church that I grew up in, and I was sent to Las Vegas, Nevada. And one of the very first things they made us do when we got there was cold contact on Vermont Street. Fremont Street. Fremont Street's what it's called. And if anyone's familiar with the city of Vegas, Fremont Street is like one of the, how do I put this? It's the scarier part of town. There's a lot of crime there in that area. They would take us out and they would just have us cold contact people on the street, walk up and start conversations. And to some degree, like, that is effective. That's almost like, what do they call it in psychology? Where it's like, it's not exposure, but you expose yourself to the thing you're afraid of to like, become used to it.
It's like confrontation or something, but yeah.
Batman does it, and Batman Begins. He goes in like into all the bats.
The Batcave. Yes, exactly.
And I think it's exposure. Yeah, it's something exposure, like something or other, exposure therapy or whatever. Anyways, to some degree, that can be effective. But that was their entire goal with this, was just to be like, get you used to it, to where the fear of it goes away. But that's not necessarily going to be the answer for you, because it wasn't for me. Like I just became used to the fact that I'm going to have to be uncomfortable every day and have uncomfortable conversations, but it didn't help me actually get anywhere. It didn't help me actually learn how to talk to people. And one of the things that I learned that has to this day been just super, super effective for me, the concept was, it's not about learning to say interesting things or be super charismatic. Like, those things help if that comes naturally to you. But if it doesn't, you can still have great conversations with people if you learn how to ask questions and listen to what people say. Yeah. That is literally the key to being able to socialize with people. If you're an introvert, is asking questions and listening, because people love talking about themselves. Like,
exactly, yeah.
Think about it this way. How easy would it be for you as an introvert to socialize with people if they came up to you? You didn't have to go over them, and they just started asking you, hey, what's your name? What are your hobbies? What do you like to do? How long have you been in the school? What's your favorite subject in school? What do you think about this or that political issue? If they just came and started asking you questions, it would be super easy, because you could just say what your opinions are, right? Use that as a way to get the other person talking. Right. You go up to them and you ask them the right questions. And the hardest part is always the initial contact. How do you make that natural? How do
Yeah.
you approach somebody and say
Who you
hi and
don't
like
know.
strike up the conversation?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And this was the part that eluded me for the longest time while I was out there for the 2 years I was there. So at first it was the exposure. It was the get used to getting over the fear of just walking up to someone and talking to them. But it didn't change how awful and awkward that conversation usually became.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then it was like, learn how to ask questions. And that really helped me in when I was already in a conversation to keep it going and to make the conversation meaningful with the person. Because then it was like, oh, this person actually cares about what I think and what I say. And we would go back and forth. And when you're asking questions and listening, they'll almost always say something that sparks an opinion that you want to share. So then you'll add your little bit to that.
Yeah.
And then you ask another question and they go on about that. And then it sparks something you want to say. And then the conversation from there becomes very natural. But how do you start it? How do you strike it up in the first place? And I don't know what exactly led me to like trying this, but it works almost all the time. Is if you go up to someone and you allow them to help you somehow. So at the time, for me, it was, this is before everyone had cell phones with GPS in them. So this wouldn't work today, but it's the same concept. I would walk up to someone and I would say, hey, I'm new to this area and I'm trying to find this address or I'm trying to find this place. I'm a little lost. Do you know where this street is? All these streets have like similar names to them. And they would say, oh, yeah, they'd be glad to like kind of, yeah, you just turn this way and you go over that way and then you'll find it there on the left side or wherever. And it's like, oh, wow, cool. Like, how long have you been in the neighborhood? It seems like you've been here a long time. Led into a question. Oh, I've been here for, 5 or 6 years. We moved because of this. Oh, so you do that for a living. How do you enjoy that? Like, what got you into, that profession or whatever? Oh, like, when I was in college, I was doing this first and then I ended up doing that. And it just totally spirals into a conversation. Now, you don't want to overstay your welcome. The guy's out there like mowing his lawn or watering his lawn or whatever. You don't want to sit there and talk to him for 2 hours. But I could have a 3 to 5 minute conversation, get a feel for like what that person, where that person's at in life, whether they had any interest in talking to me. And I could make a determination whether it's appropriate to try and like bring this up or not and move on. Right. But I learned the skill for how to start a conversation, ask the right questions, learn about who this person is, what they're all about, and sort of like add to that in a way to where they're interested in me too. Because if you let someone go on and on about themselves for like 10, 15 minutes, they're going to want to kind of return the favor. They'll be like, well, what about you? Like, what do you do? Like, why are you here? Why are you out here in 115-degree weather walking around in a suit and tie? Like, what are you doing here?
Yeah.
And so then I could talk about, well, this is why I'm here and this is why it's important to me and blah, 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 blah. So anyways, those are the 3 keys for me. First of all, it's going to be awkward no matter what. You're going to have a lot of fear, but you got to go out there and start doing it. You have to go out there and start trying. Expose yourself to the awkwardness, to the scariness, enough to where it no longer becomes scary, it becomes routine. Then allow the person to help you with something. You have a question for them, generally, and you allow them to give their expertise on in some way, even if that expertise is just they've been in this neighborhood forever and they know the neighborhood well and can give you direction. Whatever it is, you allow them to sort of like help you with something, and then you spiral that into asking them questions about how did they become so knowledgeable about that thing? Like, that's cool. Like, how did you know that? Like, and from there you just spitball and it becomes supernatural and you can talk to people really easily.
I think the important thing was that you were placed in a situation where you more or less had to do that.
Yeah, didn't have a choice.
I think traveling for me, like when I went to Japan, I met tons of people in Japan because, well, first off, I was, I'm like 6'3", and I had curly hair and I'm white, and they were all just like, "Why are you here? What?" They were just like,
"Fetch!"
and I stuck out like a sore thumb, But it was really fun. I got to meet so many people because like people were interested in talking to me, but also like I got lost. I didn't have a cell phone plan in Japan that would let me roam, that would let me do outside of the country. It was going to cost tons of money. So I did still need to ask people for directions. And it's funny because you put yourself in a situation where you have to talk to other people. And that's where you can actually practice this skill. I think it'd be really difficult for a lot of people to just kind of think to go out and do that. But it's like, if any of you guys have ever had the desire to travel, that'll also help you, because you're probably going to have to talk to people, and they're going to want to talk to you, which is cool.
Yeah. So, anyways, that's it.
Yeah.
For this podcast. Thank you for listening.
Thanks,
Did anybody else say anything? Did you see that would be we want to address?
People, tons. I just don't know. We don't have time to go through what everyone's been saying, but tons of people have just been like, dude, I agree with you, like Mike, and people are sharing their own stories here. Like somebody, Gliding Falcon, said this has become a group therapy session, which I actually think is really cool because I don't know, there's a lot of people. I think it's happening more and more with social media and with just kind of the way the world works now, that people aren't, getting out as much as they used to. And that's not anyone's fault. That's just kind of how the world works now. But there is like something inside of everybody that's like, man, I wish, like I can't find it, but somebody had said earlier, man, I wish I was an extrovert. And it's like, well, I don't know, like,
be yourself.
Being extroverts has its own issues, right? Like
it definitely does.
Yeah. And so it's just like, be yourself. But if you do want to be more extroverted than you are, it's like, but don't wish. I think a lot of people secretly have that. They're like, man, they see all the people going out and having fun every weekend. And, and it's like, well, what you're doing is fun too. Like, just don't compare yourself to other people.
Well, that actually brings something up that I want to talk
about. What they're doing.
So I am huge introvert, right? So I actually enjoy being alone. I become recharged from being alone. I'm able to relax when I'm alone. I find peace when I'm alone. Now, for those of you who are introverts and you're like, man, I wish I was extroverted. I wish I was different than I was. Here is the total freaking nightmare for an extroverted person, is being alone. When you're alone, you feel worthless. You feel like no one loves you. You feel no peace. And I don't want to get like too personal. My brother, who I told you guys about earlier, he's an extreme extrovert, right?
Yeah, you two are almost exact opposites.
Total opposites of each other.
Yeah.
And he's gone through some hard times recently, and he's moved into his own apartment. And he can't stand being there by himself. And that to me is something I'm glad I'll never have to live with or experience. Is that fact that I can be okay being alone. Like I can feel okay. I feel better. I feel good about myself when I'm alone, because I know I don't have to rely on other people around me to feel good, to feel like I'm worth it, that I'm loved, that I'm cared for. I don't have to ever worry about that feeling of loneliness, and how awful that would feel if you're in a place where I don't know, if you've moved to a new area, which is why he went out and met your family, right? The first thing he does is go out and meet people, because he can't stand the thought of, I don't have any friends in this new neighborhood. I don't have any friends around me. The fear of not having people would be horrible. I feel would be horrible to live with. I'm so glad that I'm not extroverted for that reason. Because I can feel okay being alone.
See, and that's the hard thing. Extroverts have to rely on other people. And guess freaking what? Other people aren't reliable.
I know. You can't rely on other people.
You can only rely on yourself. But I do think there's a medium. Introverts tend to, because it's fun, because it's not fun to be alone, I guess, because it's fine. It's and sometimes people are hard to deal with, and it's easier to just not deal with them. I think introverts can, both sides can sometimes take a little too far. So if there's nothing wrong with being on either end, but extroverts maybe, learn just a little bit to be okay with just kind of being, alone with your thoughts for a little while. I love it. I talk to myself a lot. I'm kind of in the middle of the introvert extrovert spectrum, but I enjoy being alone. And
Cosmic
talking to
Carts
Mike.
just said, "What about you?" I peg you as an ambivert, I think.
Yeah, I'm both. I mean, when Mike and I were friends in high school, I was typically the more I was the one that would, you know, be silly or stupid or
Yeah, met more
you know,
people,
yeah, and I would
interacted
talk
with
to
more
people and
people.
girls and stuff. I was more like that, and Mike was less like that, right? But I thought it was a fun way. We both kind of because Mike was really good at playing guitar and basketball and all these things that Mike would do like on his own, right? Because that's stuff you can do alone. And I
Yeah.
wasn't as good at those things, but I liked to learn them along with Mike. And then Mike would come along with me and we'd go meet people and, do something more social. So we both like were able to help each other out. I think that's why we had such a close friendship.
Yeah. So two
But I'm kind of
things.
in the middle.
Yeah.
I'm probably more extroverted though. I'm probably a little more extroverted than introverted.
Yeah. A nice balance between the two.
Yeah.
One thing you touched on was how when you rely on other people and other people are unreliable,
Yes.
like that's another type of like nightmare scenario for a person who's like, you think you can rely on these people, you think these people are your friends, and the heartbreak of, it's not necessarily that people are bad or that they're trying to hurt you or anything, but people just get busy or they forget or
exactly.
But that will come across to an extroverted personality more like a betrayal, more than it would to an introverted personality like mine, who's like, oh, I'm okay with that. Actually, I'm totally cool that our plans are canceled. Great. I'm going to stay home and freaking, you know what I mean? Like, I don't have to worry about that.
I've been more like that since I've been married. I've been like, I don't, because couples, like people would invite us over for dinner and it's like, oh, geez, I'd rather just stay at home. I'd rather just watch a Korean TV show or something.
Yeah. Chocolate Rob brings one thing up, though, that I wanted to touch on, too. You haven't said how you ended up socializing with the dude next to you. So I think that was part of the question. How did we meet each other?
Yeah. We didn't really touch on that, huh?
Already talked about my brother went out. Did my brother just cold knock on your door and just be like, yo, what's up?
We actually met your dad first.
That's right, because my dad came first.
We met your dad at church, right? And he's like, because your dad had moved down to Arizona before the family had. And then your dad, I remember talking to him too, and he was like, yeah, I've got sons exactly your age. Where do you live? And we're like, oh, we live super close. So I think your dad told your brother about us.
And then he
all
just
of you guys about
walked over.
And then your brother just, one day, we just got a knock on the door. And it was,
that's the kind of dude my brother is. Like, he's going to go cold contact and be like, what's up?
And
I live down the street.
He had his Game Boy. He had I don't know. It was just, it was Steve, it was great. And he was like, oh, I've got a brother your age. And it was funny.
So he went there first. And then he came back over, and I think I remember the conversation because I was playing Madden 99, I think, on the N64 or something that. And I was playing it, and he was like, dude, yeah, like, these kids, like, they're all the same age as us. Like, come over and hang out. And I was like, no, I don't want to, man. Like, I was okay with the move. I had, like, come to accept it, but I still felt really, like, depressed. About the fact that I didn't know anybody and I didn't know what was going to happen, and I was worried about the new school and stuff like that, and I was mostly just trying to hide from all of those fears, and so I was just kind of shrinking away and just like playing video games every day. I think we moved there right at the end of the summers, like right at the end of August, so school was going to be starting soon, and I was really worried about it. Because, again, I was deathly afraid of talking and meeting people. I hated the thought of even having to, like, meet people. And so my brother's like, no, man, come over. Like, come over with me. Like, meet these dudes. They're cool. So, like, I think I came over and Kaysen and I hit it off with basketball. That was, like, the first thing. Because they had a hoop outside their driveway. I had a hoop outside my driveway, and I think one of the first things we did, actually there was two things. One of the first things Kaysen and I did was we did a best of 7 like series of 1-on-1 where we would switch home courts. So you'd come over to my house and I'd be on my home court.
I don't remembe that. That's
and we'd play 2 games on my home court, but then we'd go to your house for your home court for 2 games.
We were such nerds. That's great.
An NBA best of 7 series kind of a thing. And I think I even like flipped my jersey inside out to like home road thing.
Oh, right? You had the Highland jersey. I think I had the same jersey too.
Yeah, so you flip it inside out and it's a different color, right?
Yeah. That's the white and silver and blue or something. Yeah.
Right. So, anyways, That was the way that Kaysen and I first connected. But
Yeah, we were 12 or 13, I think. Someone's asking how old we were.
Yeah, I had just turned 12 because it was August, so I had just barely turned 12. And Kaysen turned 13
and I turned 13 a few months later, yeah.
Yeah. So Kaysen's like 10 months older than me, basically.
Yeah.
Anyways, but the group, our brothers, like all of us together, I think that it was just like a Monday night thing. And your parents and your family just came over and we had like a dinner and stuff. And I remember that that's where you guys told us that you made movies. And I was like, oh, dude, I make movies and I'm into that too. And like, we should make a movie. And so it was almost right away. I want to say first or second week that our family had been there that we decided we were going to make a movie. And so we made our first little James Bond movie, and Star Wars and Mission Impossible. We made movies, and that's like that was what really cemented the friendship, was the filmmaking part of it. We'd go see movies together all the time.
That's right. Your older brother got a job at the movie theater, and so we'd all sometimes get free tickets. Yeah.
So the bonding together over filmmaking and watching movies. I remember we had we slept over at your house on the weekend. We watched all the Star Wars movies together.
Yes.
We went and saw Jurassic Park 3 in theaters, and we were super disappointed in how dumb it was. Anyways, we bonded over Jurassic Park, Star Wars, like movies that we loved. Lord of the Rings, especially in high school.
Lord of the Rings, when that came out, we were all huge on
We all saw that like 4 or 5 times. We went and saw X-Men 2 in theaters like 3 or 4 times.
Yeah, totally.
We would go rewatch movies like every weekend, basically. So that's kind of how we met and how we started to become friends and stuff. So.
Yep.
Anyways.
And now here we are.
Here we are, still making videos and still doing stuff. Anyways, that's it. Thank you, everybody.
All right, guys.
For joining the podcast this week. Appreciate you guys. Like I said, we know the topic for next week, so we will study it.
Yes. We'll be prepared.
How do you properly adapt a video game to a film? That's going to be the topic. So you guys can come with some of your thoughts too if you want to look into that. Have a good conversation.
Oh, please do.
Anyways, you guys are beasts. We'll see you again soon. Kaysen's got a Kingdom Hearts video coming to the channel soon.
Yep.
Look forward to that.
Look forward to it.
Peace out, everybody.
Peace.
Thank you.